Hello, and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit's 22nd annual Lenore Marwell Detroit Jewish Film Festival. My name is Jamie Loeb, and I'm the Senior Director of Cultural Arts at the JCC. Today's film discussion and all of our live film discussions are presented in partnership with the Detroit Institute of Art's Detroit Film Theater. I want to thank them for their support and help in making these live events a reality. One of the ways that the Film Theater has been involved in the festival is through their director, Elliot Wilhelm. Usually I can say that, I promise. He's one of the deans of the Detroit film scene, director of the Detroit Film Theater, and part-time faculty member at Wayne State University. He'll be our moderator for today's events and most of our events throughout the month, and we are so glad to have him as our film expert in residence here at the festival. This is our first virtual film festival, and we are so glad to be able to connect with all of you from the comfort of your own home. The festival runs October 4th through the 30th, and all of our films, except for one special event film going on right now, are available to watch on demand throughout that entire time. You have no excuse for missing any film. And of course, we have a whole series of live film discussions going on here on YouTube for free. And we hope you'll join us for as many of those as possible. You can find our full lineup of events, full lineup of films. You can buy tickets, festival passes, all of those things right here at our website. So check it out. While you're here on our YouTube channel, be sure to subscribe, like this video, hit the reminder bell, all of the YouTube things, so that you never miss one of our exciting virtual events. Throughout this event, we absolutely want to hear from you. We want to know what your thoughts are. We want to know your questions. So be part of the fun. Drop us a comment in the box down here, or I always do that wrong. Up here in the corner, see that number, 248-973-7286. You can text us your comments, your questions, your ideas, and we will get to as many of those as we can. Of course, our guests have a great discussion prepared for you, but they do want to take as many questions as possible. The film we're discussing today is Children of the Inquisition. It's a documentary about the history of conversos and crypto Jews and the expulsion from Spain, and the people today who are recapturing and rediscovering their own Jewish past. We are thrilled to have with us today the director and producer of the film, Joseph Lovett, as well as one of the film's subjects, Doreen Carvajal. Joseph is a veteran producer and director who's worked in film and TV, and Doreen is a reporter for the New York Times who actually lives in France and is also senior writer for the International Herald Tribune, and of course, an acclaimed author. So please join me in welcoming our guests, Doreen and Joseph, and our moderator, Elliot. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie. And hello to you, Joe and Doreen. Pleasure to meet you both.
Thank you.
I'm tempted to say, anybody here know what the Spanish Inquisition was? But to lead into it, there's so many extraordinary stories and threads of stories in your documentary that I kind of want to begin by asking Doreen a question. You were doing an interview some time ago when a rabbi you were speaking with said to you, "Gee, your name," and I don't mean Doreen, I mean Carvajal. It's an old Sephardic name, and according to what's revealed in the documentary, this came as something of a surprise to you. And it led you down a path, not ending where we are today, but with some of the extraordinary things revealed in this documentary. Can you talk about that interview and what dawned on you and how and what happened afterwards?
Well, it was a moment in Philadelphia when I was working for the Philadelphia Inquirer. I don't even remember what the story was about, but I was interviewing a rabbi at a local synagogue about something completely different. And I had never thought about the meaning of my name. My name was something that in California, where I grew up, people would make fun of. Doreen Carburetor, Doreen Carvajal. It was just this foreign name that I had no deep information about what the history meant. And so when this rabbi said to me, "Do you know it's a Sephardic Jewish name?" It was so out of context with my life, having been raised a Catholic school, a girl, church on Sundays, fish on Fridays, big family, 6 kids. I just thought, okay, but it wasn't transformational at that moment. And then because of my byline, Carvajal, periodically, the New York Times, once I moved to a new newspaper, I'd get letters from people saying, "Are you," like someone from Israel, "Are you related to Dorothy Carvajal?" And it was weird. It was like something was reaching out to me, and I ignored it. And only as I got older did I start to examine it and really dig deep. But it took a while for it to be transformational.
And did you write about it in the Times?
What I've written quite a bit about it. I wrote a book called The Forgetting River that was basically a memoir of my quest and my investigation of my family's roots. And for the Times, I wrote a piece when I went to Segovia and walked in the footsteps of my ancestors who were converts and were persecuted by the Inquisition. So I wrote about it in that sense. A book, some stories.
And Joe, can you talk a little bit about how this subject, which is a great subject, but a subject that a lot of us really didn't know all that much about, how it became this documentary, and if the documentary grew as you were making it, because there are so many tendrils of this story. At one point we're in El Paso, Texas, which is not where I expected to be taken in the tale that you're telling, which is not a tale. Can you talk a little bit about when you began to see this as a documentary?
Sure. Well, as I say in the film, I was first introduced to the subject when I was 13. Our rabbi, William Brauda of Temple Bethel in Providence, Rhode Island, was a civil rights activist and a wonderful mentor to young people during the civil rights movement. And he was a great guy. And the year that I was supposed to have been bar mitzvahed, he was on sabbatical, and he asked me to wait for him to come back to be bar mitzvahed, and which meant a lot to me. And I paid attention to what he was doing. And one of the things that he was doing was trying to do a research project on the families of the converted Jews, who were then called Marranos usually. And he came back and he gave this incredible sermon called Totus Catholicus, Everybody's Catholic, and how in trying to do this research, he found that absolutely no one in Spain that he tried to speak to would even consider having a drop of Jewish blood. And as a 13-year-old, 500 years is a lot further away than a 75-year-old would see it. And I was stunned that something that happened so very long ago could continue to have a presence on our contemporary times. And that stayed with me. And then, I grew up, I became a filmmaker, and when my sister died, my brother-in-law, my older sister, my brother-in-law died, married one of her best friends who was from a Sephardic family. And she and her mother would regale me with the stories of their family, because they traced their family all the way back to the expulsion. And I thought, well, now that I'm older and now that I've had a career, I should take this really ambitious kind of project and see what I can do with it. And so the first proposal was written 20 years ago, actually. And we started shooting about 10 years ago. And yes, it grew. Well, I don't know if it grew. I grew. We followed the lines, and the lines took us further and further and further out. And it was frustrating because you couldn't go everywhere. And the Inquisition went everywhere. And the impact of the Inquisition went literally everywhere in the world. And what was so difficult about making the film was that the information was so complicated and confounding, because you had, as you see in the film, you have people who start off as one identity, one religion. They switch to another identity, another name, another religion. Then they switch countries. Then they switch back to their old identity and their old religion, maybe from 4 generations previous. And it goes on. And so it's very, very, very confusing. And the threads go everywhere. As you see in the map, these migration routes go everywhere. And then they come back. And then they cross. And so we tried to make it a much easier for the audience than it was for me. And as one friend who's helped us a lot on this film said, you've got to understand, no one else has ever really tried to make this so accessible to the lay public before. And you have a huge responsibility. You better do it well. And so that's what we tried to do.
Well, you did. But judgment aside, let's take it back. You were talking about the expulsion. Let's go back to the 1300s, which I remember well. In Spain, Jews were not having a terribly hard time of it, as I recall. Where did the events that began after that spring from? How did this begin to take place, leading to the expulsion in the 14?
Right. Well, I'm not a historian. Let's preface it with that. And so what I do is I interview historians and I repeat what they tell me, and when they tell me contradictory things, this one and that one, I try to find something that makes sense to the general public and to myself. So that said, anti-Semitism went on for a long time, within the Catholic Church, within the Christian world. And I think the first official expulsion from a country was in England in the early 1200s. So Isabella and Ferdinand wanted a Catholic kingdom, which is how they came to expel the Jews. But before then, like about 100 years before, as we say in the film, there were a bunch of preaching friars who were quite anti-Semitic and started these, sort of like pogroms against the Jews that spread throughout all of Spain. And during that 100 years, I am told, from like 1390 to 1492, half the Jewish population of Spain had, or Iberia, or what we've come to be known as Spain, converted to Catholicism. And there were good reasons to convert. One, you didn't believe Judaism anymore. If you had the right religion, then why was things so miserable for you? So let's look at Catholicism. Or it was just too difficult to be Jewish. Let's make it easier on ourselves. Or my daughter's converting, I should convert as well, just to make it easier for the family. There are a lot of reasons to convert. But many people continue to hold on to their Jewish identity, and many continue to practice their Jewish customs underground. And that caused a great deal of consternation among the Catholic clergy, and that is what brought about the Inquisition.
And are these the conversos that we're talking about? People who were publicly non-Jews and privately
Jews
continued their traditions?
Yes, and it's really fascinating. And when you think about it, I mean, it sounds rather exotic and crazy, but we all carry many identifications. You think of yourself as Jewish or Catholic. You think of yourself as also Romanian or American and American. You think of yourself as a filmmaker or or a fruit peddler, and you also think of yourself as somebody who likes classical music and somebody who plays soccer. There are a lot of identity groups that we subscribe to, and it's not that far a stretch to be, as I've learned, to be practicing one religion and still having tremendous interest and identification with another. And then there's also the issue of religious versus identity, and I think that's an interesting conversation.
Right. There are those of us who consider ourselves in some sense cultural Jews and social Jews, but not necessarily hardcore religious Jews. But
Correct.
Society has also defined things for us throughout history. We haven't always been able to make that choice. I remember as a young person in grade school in Northwest Detroit, I never made any secret about being Jewish, but some kids would question my last name. I don't know any other Jewish Wilhelms necessarily. And I spent a long time trying to find out, exactly where my name came from. But there was a kid who was a friend of mine, and he said, my real name's Cohen, instead of the one that he used. I said, gee, why? And he said, well, my father's job is X, whatever it was, and he had to change it. He couldn't even really say we were trying to pass,
right.
And it was startling to me. And I guess I should have known. I was probably 7 or 8 years old at the time. But it's why the stories that are told here seem to be relevant. They don't seem to
Very relevant. Yes.
really gone away. I mean, the burning at the stake is a common thing. Is not exactly something we see every day, but there is a tone and an atmosphere in the world today. And I know I'm jumping ahead too fast, but it was almost like Edward R. Murrow said during the Red Scare era, the McCarthy era, during a meeting. He said, the fear is in this room. Right. It's still there.
Yes.
May I interject just
please.
Because living in France, there are many parallel things that happened here during World War II that happened during the Inquisition, and I see over and over the legacy of Jews who were secular Jews living in France who shifted to survive, to keep a job, to hide their kids with a nun, and now the third generation. I'm thinking of someone in particular. She's Jewish background. Her grandfather was a great art collector. Art was looted, and she is now this young generation is recovering some of this looted art. But yet she celebrates Christmas. She's raising her kids as Christians. And she's along the way they shifted, and now she's kind of wrestling with it to come back to her identity of her family. But they suffered so much during the war because they were Jews, even if they were secular, that it's not easy finding your way back.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. They also say that acceptance is more dangerous than anti-Semitism in terms of in terms of people remaining Jewish, and that when people are accepted, they tend to become more lax about Jewish conscriptions, and they wind up, there's more intermarriage, et cetera, et cetera. But, it's sort of interesting, and you have to wonder, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, these are all huge questions. But one of the great things about the documentary is that it delves into those big questions by going into great detail over what actually happened on the way to where we are now. It's all fascinating. The film was really kind of revelatory to me. I know some people who say, "Oh, that's old stuff." You know, we've heard a lot about what happened to the people who were part of the diaspora after the Inquisition. I hadn't. Some of the stories.
It's very
Yes.
few people who know a lot about this, and I was gobsmacked by doing the research. I mean, I have to tell you, I kept saying to myself, "You're kidding! I never knew that. Why did I ever know that? You're kidding! That's what happened. I never knew that." And as we watch an audience watch the film, I see them having the same experiences. People going, "Oh my God, you're kidding!" I mean, you can see it on their faces, and it's really fascinating. We show that I'm surprised that you said that people say a lot of people know this. We had one screening of clips early before the film was finished at the Greater Boston Jewish Genealogical Society, which is a very well-educated group of people, many people with a vast interest in Jewish history. And there are about 200 people, and I would say there were only about 5 in that group, and this was a very erudite audience, who really were read in on the diaspora story, and people were just fascinated. I mean, because people react to the film as if we've given them some extraordinary gift, some extravagant gift, like they can't thank us enough.
You have. I thought it was actually mind-blowing. And a lot of the things that you find out along the way, there's a ketubah shown in the film from the era of the Ottoman Empire, as I recall, and there are Islamic symbols on it.
Yes,
these relationships, the way they've shifted over the centuries, are fascinating. Can you go into a little bit about either of you about the Islamic Jewish relationship and how it was once something quite different than it is today?
Well, that's one of the things I was really struck with. Excuse me, Dante. Sorry. You know, when you look at the question of Israel in the Arab world, so often you hear there will never be any peace. The Jews and the Arabs have always been at one another. All forever. The Jews and the Muslims. There's always been this antagonism. Blah 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 blah. Nothing good can ever come of it. And then you look at history, and that's just not the case. And this is not to suggest that there was an ideal world for the Jews within the Muslim world, and even in Spain when the Muslims ruled various parts of Spain. But there was a level of acceptance, second-class citizenship, but acceptance, and people were able to live and to thrive as opposed to being executed. Often. So it really, doing this film and doing the research on this film, like just opened my eyes to many things that not just what could be, but what was and what can be improved upon. I mean, what do you think, Doreen?
Doreen, I thought your image was frozen for a second.
Well, there was. I was just going to say during that period of the convivencia, when the Muslims were ruling the Iberian Peninsula, I think it was kind of a wary kind of tolerance between the groups. But the Muslims also respected and needed the intellectual skills of Jews because they read, they knew how to read. And there are many jokes, even in the Don Quixote, the book, about where someone says, "I'm a Christian, sir, I don't read." Christians didn't read at the time. They didn't know how to read. And so because of those intellectual skills, Jews were doctors, physicians. They served in important positions for the ruling class. So the nature of their connection was kind of wary respect. They weren't singing Kumbaya. I mean, it wasn't that kind of a connection, but they used each other and they tolerated each other.
And that's some Jews, of course. I mean, there were plenty of, poor, downtrodden Jews as well.
Right.
But as Doreen points out, because Jews were literate, they had certain things that they could do. The Christian church wanted people to sit in the church and be told the word from the pulpit, and not to think for themselves, just to accept it. And where in the Jewish tradition, you read,
argue.
you argue, and then you argue more.
Right. Well, and in that sense, simply converting. We did get back to the Inquisition itself. Saying that you've changed your beliefs, conversion didn't always guarantee that you were going to survive, did it?
Oh no.
So, what was the Inquisition really about? And let's go back to some of the mechanics of it, and its origins. Who wants to jump in?
Doreen, you want to do Judaism?
Well, I mean, part of it was financial. The Inquisition didn't have an independent source of revenue. And so to get money to support their activities, they typically targeted secret Jews, crypto Jews, who had money. Why else would they bother? If they could succeed in investigating someone, they could seize their property, they could seize their resources and make money. So I always like to say, whenever I'm doing anything, to follow the money, and that's an important element to look at.
Well,
so this was a profit-making enterprise, then, in a sense.
I mean, the pure look at it is that the state did not wanted a purely Catholic country, okay, and so they wanted, but before the expulsion, you were allowed to maintain your Jewish status, but if you chose Catholicism, which was probably a safer place to be, your sincerity was always in question. And so let's say I'm a Jew who converts, all right? And let's say Doreen is a Christian who has, let's say we're both leather makers, okay? And Doreen is a Christian, and we're competitors with one another. Because of my background, I'm literate and numerate. I can keep accounts. I can do all sorts of stuff with my business that's harder for her because she doesn't read and she can't do mathematics. She might become very jealous of me, and I'm not good for her business. So she might go to you, the Inquisitor, and say, this guy, he says he's a Catholic. He says he's converted, but I know for sure he's not, because I've seen him bathe on Friday nights like the Jews do. I've seen him leave the house. I think he's going to have dinner with his Jewish sister, or I've seen this or that or the other. And all it takes is one accusation for me to be taken by the Inquisition. And as Doreen points out, the accuser gets part of the money, and the person who's accused must pay for their own keep while they're in the dungeon. Their family must take care of them.
And so much of this is reminiscent of what happened in the early years of the Nazis, with people telling themselves, well, we just have to endure these certain indignities for the moment, but it'll pass. It's not going to get worse than this. Okay, we're not going to be able to do this kind of business. We're not going to be able to go to this store.
Right,
we're not going to be able to send our children to this school, but it could be worse.
Right.
And it's never going to get that bad.
But they were
until it does.
Right. But they were sometimes right, because over the years, the Muslims came into invaded Spain in the 700s and took over, and then they were changing fortunes between Muslim kingdoms and Christian kingdoms. This is before there was an actual Spain, and sometimes one kingdom was good for the Jews, sometimes another kingdom was good for the Jews, and things did change. So you might want to wait it out. And so this idea of, well, let's wait and see, was not far-fetched. There was a historical background to that. It's just a matter of, whether you get killed while you're waiting.
Let me back up to the issue of following the money again, because one thing to bear in mind when the expulsion happened in 1492, all these Jews that were forced out, if they refused to convert, they were leaving behind their property. They were leaving behind their money. They were helping rulers who had a considerable amount of debts in connection with the battles in Granada. So you follow the money. How do they get money? How did the Nazis get money? They seized art collections. They seized bank accounts of Jews. It was systematic in both cases. So again, follow that money trail and it'll explain why it's happening.
Yeah.
And at a point, of course, it becomes about vastly more than that, and becomes a kind of a cultural or national psychosis in which, explaining things logically. Oh, this is going to be profitable. This isn't going to be profitable. At a certain point, it becomes something very different, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's as you say that, it makes me think of today, doesn't it?
I was hoping somebody would say it so that the moderator wouldn't have to.
Yeah, no, very upsetting.
I mean, we're always on the verge of it's why laws are wonderful, and why the whims of individual rulers tend to not be. I'm getting a couple of questions in. Somebody wanted to point out rituals have come out through art, and this questioner wants to know if you found this was so, and if you found examples of this in making the documentary.
I'm sorry, rituals
have come out through art, and did you find this to be the case when you were making the film? About
do you mean like Jewish rituals, hidden Jewish rituals?
I'm not absolutely sure what the questioner specifically means, but does that suggest anything to you in terms of
can I take a crack?
Please.
Yeah.
I'll take a quick crack and then see to Joe. One example that I was fascinated by when I was living in the south of Spain were the Semana Santa rituals of where people would sing to religious images of Jesus and Mary as they're carried on a pallet. And they were singing a particular song a cappella, straight from the heart, with some of the same tones of the Kol Nidre. And some of the speculation by, flamenco experts is that conversos used to sing like that to demonstrate that they were good Christians, but in reality, they were using the same tones, kol nidre, of forgiveness for broken promises. So in that sense, it's a ritual kind of turned on its head.
And actually, the same questioner just had added that very subject as a question to you, Doreen. But Joe, go ahead.
Yeah. No. Please, you go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to ask another question, and that is that questioner says there are so many fascinating stories out there. Can you share a story that didn't make it into the film?
Yeah.
And also for many hidden Jews who practiced in secrets for hundreds of years, ritual thing. But yeah, come on, let's hear it.
I've got one. Joe, have you got one?
Well, I mean, it was very, very hard getting this down to a reasonable length. Of course, it's a long film, but it could have been much longer. It could have been a series. I mean, we weren't funded to do a series. But one story that made me very sad not to include was the story of Isaac Abravanel and Abraham Senior, who were the leaders of the Jewish community in Segovia, and it was a fascinating story because they were advisors to the Queen, and they thought they were going to be able to bribe her, and that this would all pass, and they gathered a lot of money. They offered the bribe. There's a very famous painting where Torquemada is shown throwing coins at the king and queen, saying, they sold Jesus out, for, so many shekels, and this is what you're doing. So anyway, it didn't work, of course, and they were expelled. So Isaac Abravanel was in his 60s, and he and his family left, and I believe they went to the Ottoman Empire. And but Abraham Senior was in his 80s, and he converted. And there's another famous painting about his conversion that they used for their propaganda. But it was an example of, well, what do you choose, and why do you choose it? And, what is the path? Do you choose martyrdom? Is that helpful? I don't know. Montefiore, I'm not Montefiore. I'm blanking on the great philosopher from the 12th century.
Maimonides?
Maimonides. Thank you, Doreen.
Of course.
Yeah, but I mispronounced his name.
You saved us all. Thank you.
Yeah, so Maimonides' his family was living in Spain during a very repressive Muslim realm, and they left Spain, and they found themselves in Egypt, and his attitude was that if you were forced to convert on pain of death, you did so. You were obligated to do so. But at the first moment where you could regain your Jewish identity and Jewish practice, you must do so no matter what. And which is sort of a very interesting, less severe way of looking at this question than some people have taken.
Right. Doreen, you were going to add something?
Oh, I was just going to mention, when you embark on a quest like this, you never stop finding out different things. And one element that I found out, really after production of the movie, that I just thought was interesting was as I keep tracing different family lines in Costa Rica, I keep coming across examples of cousins marrying cousins. And there was one story. Someone found me, a genealogist from Costa Rica, after I had written about this, and he had tracked down a great grandmother of mine who was illegitimate from a president of Costa Rica and his cousin. They were first cousins. And through the genealogy that this person had gone through or had researched, they found me and another family, and they started connecting the dots. And interestingly, this particular president, and he had brothers that were prominent at the time, on their gravestones are a Star of David. So, you know, it was just this one more clue as you're searching through your family, as you're connecting the dots. And I didn't even go searching for it. Someone came to me.
You know, along those lines, what do you see as the, you know, either of you, the benefit or the result or the effects of the popularity of $49 DNA testing, which people can now get and discover something about their genealogy? Is that changing the face of what you have discovered? Is it opening this world up to more people?
Definitely.
Well, I did it. You know, I've got my father tested, I tested, and I still feel it's just one tool. It's interesting, but what you have to do is find your structure, do the genealogy research, not just one line, but a number of lines, because they tell you patterns. And to me, DNA is not enough. You have to find the history of your family.
Right.
Also, it's fun. I mean, a lot of this is conjecture.
Sure.
You know, when I started to do the film, I really didn't think that Jews could trace themselves back to maybe beyond the 1700s. It never dawned on me. And then I meet Doreen, who traces her family back to the 1300s. And I met people who traced themselves back to the 1200s. Carlos de Medeiros, another character in our film, traces himself back to the 1400s. You know, it's quite remarkable. But it's I had never been able to trace myself back further than my grandfather's boat, you know. But I did the DNA testing as well, just to see if it might add something to the story, if I, you know, the narrator, you know, had any of these roots. And it came out that I was mostly Ashkenazi, but like a little bit from the Eastern Mediterranean and a little bit from Finland. But then over the years, as these databases grow, they change the orientation. So most recently, it turned out that I was 4% lower Mediterranean, meaning Sardinia, Sicily, Italy, Greece, which some genealogists say suggests that part is Sephardic, and then another part is Iranian, Iraqi, Saudi Arabian, and it's just sort of fascinating when you realize how long people have been migrating from one place to another and meeting one another and, you know, creating families one way or another, and that our views of identity are probably much broader than most of us look at.
Yeah, I did the DNA testing about 2 years ago because my family was never really able to tell me much beyond, well, your father's family from Poland, mother's family from Russia, sent in the test. But we were always told in some way that somehow we got our last name from some ancestors who had lived in Holland, some Dutch ancestry. The map that I got back from the company I sent the thing to cuts a wide swath, and Holland was in there. But what I found odd about it was that it's probably too much personal information about me. It came back saying, you are 100% European Jewish. And I kind of didn't even know European Jewish was
Right.
a thing. And I was also puzzled because I'd never believed that anyone could be 100% anything. There was something very, I won't say Nazi-like, but there was something very weird about the idea of a purity of 100% being put on an evaluation, particularly one that's supposed to be scientific in some way. So it disturbed me.
Yeah, well, I've done a couple of this DNA testing, and they vary tremendously. I think the most popular one is the most likely to give you 100%, and some of the others are more subtle.
So I'm glad I've made this interview all about me so far. Hate to do that. A quick cinematic question before we take some more questions from the public, I hope. What's the situation with your film in terms of distribution, in terms of how people are being exposed to the movie?
That's very interesting. The film premiered at the Seattle Jewish Film Festival, and then are you hearing anything in the background?
No.
No, good. And then we started to get a number of engagements, festival engagements, and community screenings. And then COVID happened, so we thought, "Oh God, what are we going to do? Everything canceled, et cetera, et cetera." So my outreach director, Jordan Hawkes, and I decided that we would try online screenings. And so we went back to the groups that were going to have us live and said, "Do you want to try it online?" Because we have another film called Going Blind that has been very successful online, and we did that. And so we would do online screenings and then Zoom panel talkbacks like this one. And we've had pretty wide distribution internationally, really. And we don't want to make it available to individuals yet, because we want the conversation.
Yep.
We like meeting people, engaging different communities to talk about it. The best screenings are really when one group invites other groups to join them. Like in Denver, this was a live event, but in Denver, a synagogue invited a Latino art museum membership to join. And the conversation was phenomenal, was so rich. In Rhode Island, at the Rhode Island International Film Festival, there are a lot of people of Portuguese descent that live in Rhode Island. And the Portuguese community came, many of whom were aware of they were Catholic, but aware of their Jewish roots.
Sure.
And it was a fascinating discussion, especially for the people of European Jewish background, because they had no idea. They were stunned. And it becomes very, very vibrant. And I guess what I loved about making this film and showing it is that it helps people to see the world differently.
Yeah.
Very differently, actually.
Yeah, I would love to have shown the film in the DIA's 1,000-seat theater, and had discussions. And when we reopen, I think this movie is not something that has a short shelf life. Yeah. This is a film that's going to be seen for many, many years. It's going to be absolutely as relevant 10 years from now as it is now, and just as good and informative.
Thank you. That's so nice. We created, there are a lot of ways that you can go when you're making a film. And one of the things that has been going on in the past few years is the offering of citizenship by Spain and Portugal to people that can prove their Jewish roots. And we chose not to go there because I didn't want to. That's one of the things that we didn't use. And to answer, one of your chat questions, because we didn't want it pegged to a current event.
Right.
We didn't peg it to contemporary immigration issues and refugee crises, because we didn't want it pegged to a contemporary event. We want it to be an evergreen, as you point out, and so that it would always be relevant. And then whatever the refugee crisis is of the time, and there always will be one.
There will be one, yes.
Yeah, people can bring that to it.
Yeah.
And you know, so.
Yeah, it was a wise decision, I should add. And Jamie, I want to know if you've got other questions that are coming in, if you want to jump into the discussion, or if you got any yourself.
Well, we do have some from the audience who did talk about the DNA testing. But Brenda asks for Doreen, has discovering this new heritage, or I guess new to you heritage, has it changed your life? And if so, how has it changed your life?
Well, I would say over time it was transformational. When I started looking into this, I was a secular Catholic. I wasn't going to church. But as I pursued this, I just totally broke away connections with the church. I felt like my ancestors over time had really struggled to protect the treasure of their identity. And so going up to my great aunt, who continued to have a menorah in her cupboard, and prayed to it. And I mean, in all their changes and shifts and how they viewed religion, they still managed to protect it. So I felt that I just couldn't stay connected to the church in any way anymore. And I've continued to evolve, and I've seen this with other people who are descendants. For many, it's a slow process, and they don't always bring their children along. It's not easy. And so in my case, what I'm doing now, I tried to find the right synagogue. Some were too conservative for me. Right now, I've involved in a community, the Hineni community. It's the Rabbi Jill Zimmerman is in Orange County, and we're basically a Zoom group, and she emphasizes spirituality, which is what really appealed to me. And she also teaches about the history of Judaism through her lessons about spirituality. So I'm kind of learning along the way. I haven't gone through a formal conversion. My daughter actually went on a birthright tour, and she was worried when I dropped her off at the airport. She said, they're not going to accept me. I have a secret. And I remember thinking, I can't believe it. We're still talking about secrets in the family. And as it turned out, the young people, it was a French group. The young people were very accepting, really interested in our story, taught her how to say some of the prayers that she didn't know. Really warm and receptive. So it's a continuing journey, I have to say.
Yeah.
And, there was another question a little earlier, and I think it's come up a few times now. So in the film, there were people who mentioned, there were these small rituals or habits in my family that it was just what my grandmother did. I didn't really think about it. Turns out it's sort of a Jewish ritual. And you mentioned the menorah in was it your aunt or your great aunt, in her cupboard?
My
were there
great
any
aunt,
other,
my great aunt.
Your great aunt, right? So were there other rituals, habits, objects that, now looking back, you say, oh, this is how they were protecting that? Or was it mostly hidden from you?
Well, here's an example in retrospect. When I go back to Costa Rica periodically, where my father was from, I'm talking to relatives, and you start to hear more things. And one thing was they always had family dinner on Saturday, not on Sunday. And my great grandfather would always go off with a bunch of men on Saturday, and one of them was a rabbi. When my father made First Communion, his father refused to go to the church. There's just things like that, and I'm constantly looking for actions like that, And I made a terrible mistake as a reporter when I was first trying to explore my family's past. I spoke to my aunt about it, and I knew she knew a lot more, and she wasn't telling me. But my approach was to directly to ask her, were we Jews? And she said, I don't know. It was the times. I don't know anything about that. But if I had approached it in a way like softly, like, what kind of food did you eat when you were little? What were the rules in your family? If I'd taken that approach, I think I would have found out a lot more. But those are some of the examples that I found out.
It is
or
so
like
fascinating.
my grandmother giving strict instructions to my dad that she would have no priest at her funeral. So things like that.
There's a tell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly. That's the right terminology.
Yeah.
You're looking for the tell, but you have to do it I found in a soft way.
But what you learned through that example of reporting, I think, is probably true for just everybody in their regular everyday relationships.
Absolutely.
How you can unintentionally shut people down in a conversation about things that are less profound than this, simply by being too direct.
It's nice to continue the conversation. Keep it going, and then you'll see what happens.
And as a documentary filmmaker, I mean, that must be one of your challenges as well, to get people to be interviewed, to get people to talk. It's a process, and it must involve a lot of film or tape.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an editor's nightmare.
Yeah,
I really am. I do very long interviews because for this very reason, things come out. Things come out. I used to work at the networks as a producer at 2020 for 10 years. I'd been a producer at CBS. When I was at CBS, we had very limited, we were shooting film. It was very expensive. You had very limited time and amount of film that you could use. And it was always the case that you'd finish the interview, you turn off the lights, and then as the crew was starting to break down the set, these nuggets would start coming out of the
now you tell me.
Yeah. Oh my God. And you wind up putting the lights back on and popping in another film magazine at great expense, but it was worth it, And so with video, of course, you can and with things being digital now, unfortunately, you can go on forever.
Frederick Wiseman told me that he takes still a full year to edit, and that he has all of the different sequences that he films for something edited down into different little subcategories and different stories, and then looks at it over and over again to see if he's giving a false impression of what was going on. But a full year just in the editing process.
Well, ours was longer.
Wow.
We spent 2 full years in the final edit, and that's after having put a number of sequences together over the 8 years that we were shooting.
Well, you can see the real thought and care that went into telling the story that you tell, and I really think you did an extraordinary job, both of you, with all of the information that you had. And all of the different ways there were to assemble something like this. It's really extraordinary.
Well,
really
I
hope a lot of people see it.
I had a wonderful producer working with me, Hillary Klotz-Steinman, who was really fantastic, and Doug O'Connor. And the two of us have worked on a number of other films together, the three of us, and extremely talented and dedicated and very, very special people. And of course, our cast was incredible. I mean, people like Carlos. I mean, we had such cooperation, such passion for the subject. I mean, they were as passionate about it as I was, and not just for their own story, but for the bigger story, and have continued to help me with the outreach like this, and it's been fantastic.
It's also a great looking picture. And you go around the world watching this film, but it's not a simple cruise around the world. You're actually taking in not just stories, but images from everywhere, and you've made the most of it.
Thank you. Our cameraman, our principal cameraman, Sam Shin, was amazing. And I mean, we'd be in Spain, and Sam would be up at sunrise, shooting every sunrise that we had, shoot every sunset. I mean, shoot all day long, and then shoot night shots. I mean, he never stopped shooting. We have the most extraordinary footage. And what was really disappointing when we were showing it in, like, sometimes synagogue meeting halls, it would look so horrible. I mean, just horrible. And then to be at a film festival and to see it blown up on an excellent screen. We're in Chicago at the Chicago Film Festival, and we were dazzled by how gorgeous it was.
Well, I can tell you that the high definition streaming that our JCC is doing on the film does it justice. As
Great.
Beautiful as it can look, on a digital format like this, it looks great.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so
Absolutely.
glad.
So, Jamie,
can I interject?
Yes,
One more thing, just about Hillary? I mean, you talked about how great Sam was on, photography, but just a quick anecdote on Hillary. She was a key person who helped me to track down the tombs of my ancestors, going back to the 15th century. And it illustrates technique again, what she had to do. She happened to talk to a professor of history in New York who mentioned that she knew there were some tombs somewhere in Segovia. And then she went through a woman at the Chamber of Commerce who was a good friend of the daughter of a marquesa who had the tombs in her private backyard in a little chapel there. I mean, it was amazing what she was able to do. And Joe, you can jump in. I mean, you had another friend who directly approached this marquesa who refused. Explain what happened.
Yeah, well, we have a friend in Madrid who's extremely helpful. She got us into the Prado. She got us all sorts of the Bellas Artes Museum, and put us in touch with this marquesa in Segovia who wound up saying no. But through this other contact, and it turned out that our guide on that day, in Segovia, was as Doreen points out, was a personal friend of the daughter of the marquesa. So she had been in and out of her beautiful home, all her life. And so she asked the marquesa, "Oh, sure, just come on over." I mean, it goes to show how often, these things happen serendipitously, and it's about, trying again and trying a different angle. And, the best thing is if somebody actually knows someone and can make it and has a good relationship.
And that's what journalism is ultimately, right? I mean, you're doing detective work, you're following up leads, you're not giving up, you're finding another entrance. If this one's locked, then there may be a way around, but a lot of it's got to be luck. Yeah.
Oh, a lot of it's luck.
But you got to know it when you see it.
You have to be intrepid so that you're there when the luck happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we're lucky to have had you here, if I may say so.
Thank you.
And Jamie, any more?
Well, I want to say thank you
in,
to everyone. The last comment we had was, "Welcome to the tribe, Doreen." So welcome. And I hope that you, and I think, I hope that everyone who finds this new piece of their family history finds a way to connect with them, with that history, but also finds a way to connect with Jewish life, Jewish culture in the now, and that they find a Jewish community that they can connect with in some way. So thank you to all of you who are joining us in internet land. Thank you to Elliot, our moderator. Thank you to our guests, Joe and Doreen. It's been a pleasure having all of you this afternoon. And I want to let you know that our next live film discussion is on Tuesday, October 27th, also at 12 noon Eastern Time. And this is a very special event. We are trying a sort of death-defying thing. So we will be talking about the film The Damned, and we'll have one of the actors from the film, and we'll be doing it half in English and half in Hebrew. So we really hope you'll join us for that special event. If you don't speak Hebrew, come to the English part. I think we'll be doing English first, and then we'll switch into Hebrew. So we hope you will join you. We hope that you will join us for that special event on Tuesday at noon. Thank you all for being here, and have a great day.